Inquire within.
In this troubled economy, we do need jobs.
Yes, we do. And welcome to the Requiem Metal Podcast. I am Jason.
And I'm Mark, and we're back with part 2 of Hypocrisy. And, Inquire Within has some interesting things going on. It's probably one of the slowest, heaviest songs Hypocrisy had probably ever written up until this point. And just hits you right over the head. One of the things Hypocrisy has been really good at doing, especially with the rhythm guitar, is that sort of really slow, chunky, just super bottom heavy kind of riffing. It's almost like part of their like identity, at least this like fourth dimension forward kind of identity. To have that, and then also to have like these kind of like cool melodies kind of weaving within the chunky rhythm. Yeah, they've been able to kind of balance the melodic with the brutal, but in a different way than they have before.
Yeah, and you hear it definitely in a song like Inquire Within, because it all sort of is just sort of like builds and builds and builds and builds, and then you've got this really like great solo, very tasteful, and Peter at this point is really starting to hit his stride with some of the most tasteful guitar playing I think he's ever done. The only thing I can compare it to for him is like some of the later stuff, like Virus. He's kind of tapped back into that a little bit. But this is a weird record. Final Chapter. This is a record that Mark and I always laugh about how horrible the cover is.
The three most unphotogenic guys on the cover of the album.
I mean, I don't know if this was a rush job because they wanted to get this out sooner, or what they were even thinking conceptually.
Well, I think the next cover is even worse.
It's pretty bad. Yeah,
some little aliens coming over a hill or something.
Yeah, and this is such the transitional technology phase of kind of computer. Photoshop and all that
it's
stuff.
When every butthole, with Photoshop was putting something together.
Yeah, and you kind of saw the worst of that, I'm sure, as a graphic artist starting out around this time. Just no one really knew what to do with the technology and stuff. But Final Chapter, this is a record I kind of had to get pretty intimate with. I had to review it, I do believe, for the very first issue of Eclipse, or maybe it was Eclipse number 2. And so it was one of the first big reviews, I guess, I felt like I had. This and Morbid Angel, Formulas Fatal to Flesh. Geez, say that 5 times fast.
Seashells by the seashore. Yeah. Thanks, Trey.
Those were the two like first big records that I think Chris gave me to do before he knew whether or not I was going to be a solid writer or something like that. And so I really delved into this pretty heavily, and
that's one I never listened to.
Yeah, and you were kind of I
was done with it,
out of the metal kind of thing for a while, at least in terms of being connected in with Chris and the record store and some of that stuff. So supposedly Final Chapter, the reason it's called Final Chapter, this was supposed to be the end,
just Peter, like the Friday the 13th franchise.
There you go. And just like the Friday the 13th series, it found a second life. I think what happened with this record is the response to it was so overwhelmingly positive that I think it
sold really well, and I think it was reviewed pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was amazing. I still think it's for me, it's my favorite Hypocrisy. From start to finish. I mean, Abducted has some moments on it that are absolutely riveting, but there's something about, I think, just the time that I heard this record, which sometimes can connect you to a record. This was my freshman year in college, and it's, I think at this point I'm really starting to be able to process, European death metal, and I'm really starting to hear things in songs that, when I was a junior in high school and just kind of getting familiar with this stuff, I didn't really know where to compartmentalize stuff. And I think
when you have to break something down to review it too, you're thinking it in an entirely different way.
Absolutely.
And breaking it down and thinking lyrically, I think you're spending more time with the record ultimately. Yeah. If you're doing the review the right way.
Yeah. Unless you're one of those reviewers who just listens to it once and then just kind of writes their first impression. And
which helps nobody.
Yeah, no. And I can admit, and I'm sure you can admit, that in some of those rush jobs at the bottom of your pile of reviews, sometimes you're kind of like,
there is records that are just awful and have nothing good about them at all.
Yeah, just listen to this once. I remember this for that very first issue of Eclipse.
Jungle Rot?
No. Chris did give me an EP by a band by the name of Stained, who went on to become The Stained.
Was this, were they in Roadrunner at that point?
I don't know.
I was wondering if they were one of those Nickelback.
Oh, man, I slagged it.
Godsmack.
And I'm glad I did, because that was sort of the future of my reputation probably rested on whether or not I liked that record or not. So, but yeah, so
I'm sure they advertised.
Exactly. I had the good and the bad. I had Hypocrisy and I had Stain. But Final Chapter, it's got so many different dynamics working for it. It's got the slow, heavy songs like you heard there. It's got Request Denied, the sort of epic, like anthemic kind of songs that you heard at the very end of part 1. It's got a song like Through the Window of Time, which we're going to listen to next, which is very much influenced by like black metal. It's got some really cool like uses of kind of keyboards and things going on with it, and it's also got kind of the sort of Swedish Black Death melodic kind of interplay of black metal, kind of Dissection Dawn type stuff. And like you were saying in part 1, I mean, Peter's a sponge, and he's just gotten done working with a lot of those sort of Black Death bands.
This isn't the track that has like the Burzum sounding vocals, is it?
No, that was there was a song we didn't have time to play.
Okay.
And I'm trying to remember what that was. Shama Tour, which I'm not even really sure what that means, but there's a lot of songs on here were we to have more time, I'd love to play the title track, that ends the record, the final chapter. It's kind of it's got that feel of this is the last song that we're ever going to write, kind of like End of the Road from Sentence, from the Sentence show we did a couple weeks back. And so, it has all those things sort of working for it. And so then you go from that song to like Adjusting the Sun, which is the next song we're going to play. And this is a song where I've had a lot of the title itself, I thought a lot about it, and I remember talking to Mark about how, from a history teacher standpoint, I hear the song and I hear the title Adjusting the Sun. It's talking about, is there life that exists out there? And if we can prove that there's sort of alien life out there, which is one of Peter Tatgreen's obsessions at this point, then it will be, in a way, like it will change religion. It will change it will change everything about how we look at the universe and our role as human beings in it, and whether there's a God, whether there's not a God.
It'll be like the biggest thing from thinking that the sun rotated around the Earth.
Yeah, it's the Copernican revolution in a way. The scientific revolution got started when Copernicus basically said, actually, we're not the center of the universe. We're not like God's special people. We're third rock from the sun. We orbit the sun.
Let's go, dude.
All that stuff. And so he adjusted the sun in a sense, and that sort of destroyed a lot of the validity that the Christian church had in Europe at the time and stuff, and the role that religion played. And so I hear the title of that song, and it kind of...
I think Tiamat as soon as I hear that name.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't know why. It sounds like a title that could have been off Wild Honey.
Yeah, they did have a song about the sun. A sun... It's the last song. It's like pretty epic and very Pink Floyd-ish. There was a sun. Da, da, da. Like I can totally like hear it.
Pocket Size Sun.
Pocket Size Sun. There you go. Okay. Look at that.
The memory works. Even with cold medication.
Yeah. And but anyway, so Adjusting the Sun. This is probably my favorite song on the record, and it has. This is kind of like them doing unanimated. It's like Hypocrisy kind of doing all that, and the solos that you hear on Through the Window of Time and Adjusting the Sun are just there. I mean, it seems like Peter is just hitting on all cylinders on this record. I mean, he's really found his stride, and he's throwing his heart and soul into every song, because I think he thinks this is it.
Yeah, it is, I think, a little bit more fractured than say Abducted.
I agree. There's a lot more.
It's a little more fragmented. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's still, each song is so good that it doesn't. Really,
it has its own kind of separate personality.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's a Razor tune called "Evil Invaders," which I go to Mark. I go, "Have you ever heard of Razor?" And Mark, you were like, "It's probably some obscure Canadian thrash band." Yeah. It just sounds like it. And of course, sure enough, there you go.
Just anytime it's a one, like Anvil, Razor,
Pile Driver. Yeah. What was the other one? Annihilator or something like that, or Voivod. Yeah, there you go. Those Canucks. Yeah. And then we're going to close things out here with Elastic Inverted Visions, which this is a song that never was supposed to happen, from a record that was never supposed to happen, which is the post final chapter, self-titled Hypocrisy. And it's a good tune. It's ridiculously catchy. It's very simple. It's almost kind of like hypnotic in a way in terms of its like repetitiveness and stuff. But it's a nice introduction back for a band that was supposed to be essentially dead, and it kind of has risen from the ashes. So, and we'll talk more about the self-titled Hypocrisy when we come back. So enjoy a pair of tunes from Final Chapter, Through the Window of Time, and Adjusting the Sun, and Elastic Inverted Visions. those elastic inverted visions adjusting the sound and through the window of time. And you could definitely hear a more refined thing kind of going on with that last tune in particular. I mean, I mentioned it was ridiculously catchy, almost like simple, hypnotic, just very, very repetitive in a way too. And, I think that's what you can say about the self-titled record that they put out in like 99 is that besides having a pretty awful cover, that you mentioned, the kind of very X-File-ish cover, I don't know what's going on there for their little alien embryos or something floating around, and I don't know.
In Arizona, something. I don't know.
Something weird. It seems like a bad outtake from X-Files, but the thing you can say about the self-titled is I think this is kind of the peak of this sort of late 90s metal kind of sound, and the clean, crisp. I mean, this is almost like defines the late 90s in a way. Not just in metal, but also like I think in music in general. This was like when Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, Britney Spears, like the sort of the ultra digitized, ultra overproduced kind of stuff was starting to really like, everybody wanted everything to kind of almost sound perfect. And I think,
I think digital technology was really getting. I mean, everything was done digital at this point. I think too.
Yeah, and
everything was tweaked to a there's no like happy accents anymore.
Yep.
Triggered drums, all that kind of crap too.
Yep. And I think a lot of metal bands that sort of made their living on that kind of died a death in a way, or at least got knocked down a few pegs in terms of like how critics looked at them or even how the fans viewed them. In a band like Cradle of Filth or Dimmu Borgir, I mean, those are bands that I think suffered in a way because of that late 90s kind of over perfected kind of era. Even early 2000s, late 90s, I guess is what I'm talking about. So this record is a melodic kind of heavy death metal record. This sound has kind of reached its peak with this self-titled, I think. And I think Hypocrisy from this point on through the early 2000s will kind of like struggle in a way to like figure out what they want their new sound to be. Yeah. And I think that defined metal in the early 2000s in a weird way. I mean, metal really went in a lot of different like avenues and different.
Yeah, because we had the mid to late 90s deal with everybody, previously death metal bands experimenting with their sound.
Or doom metal, if you're talking.
Yeah, almost everybody across, really kind of stretching a lot. And then, we get to the kind of the glut of the late 90s, early 2000s, and then people finally like, okay, well, it's almost, like CG in movies or something. It's like this new tool. Everybody like really kind of screws with it to the nth degree, and then like, okay, well, let's think about good songwriting and not the digital technology quite so much.
And just like with Hollywood, with that kind of metaphor, there's only so many like destructive explosion kind of like big cinema stuff that you can see, where after a while you just kind of get numb to it and you're kind of like,
man, Day After Tomorrow 2012,
it doesn't do it for me anymore. And then you have to like inject the intelligence and like you said, the songwriting and things back into it, and you got to make kind of smart action films like Dark Knight and things like that, where like you're using all the explosions and all the cool stuff, but you're also like adding a more organic story nature to it. And I think the same kind of goes with what was going on with metal at that time, and in a weird way it took a lot of I think it took some of the American bands to re-inject some of the organic kind of like veracity, the emotional side into it. And I think of like, albums like Jane Doe and things like that, or even like what Catatonia was doing with Last Fair Deal Gone Down, these albums that are almost like wearing their emotions on their sleeves and their rawness to them. You know what I mean?
Honesty.
In terms of the honesty of it. So, not to slag this album, it's almost a perfect record in a weird way in how it's produced. It's like there's not an error or a bad guitar solo on it. It just feels somewhat disconnected in a way from what Hypocrisy had been doing up to this point.
Yeah, totally.
But it's a good record. I mean, it's the last great record that they'll do for a while. And we've got a tune that we'll play, another song off of it called Fractured Millennium. And that one in particular, it's the album opener, so it's a good set opener as well. It kind of has the cradle-ish scream going on. It's got the keyboards. I mean, it's got the whole the kitchen sink, in a way.
It's got the overproduced drums that they were kind of like let themselves shine a little bit. That Cradle did in I don't know how many different songs. So
and Mark and I were kind of bouncing around the idea of if we could ever pull a Cradle show off. I think we could. It just have to be our own approach to it,
Gilded Cunt. That was my number one choice.
Sure, yeah. As long as you get that and what's the Lord Abortion on there?
That was good.
We could kind of have
I guess as long I don't mind
Cradle's Guide to
older Cradle as long as I don't have to see Danny.
Yeah, exactly.
And his exposed, fatness now.
His fat goth mesh.
Hot topic, Dad.
Yeah, man. Yeah. But Cradle. I almost start talking about Cradle Filth. Hypocrisy. Like I said, this record wasn't supposed to happen, and in a way, life has been sort of breathed back into the band. And the next record he puts out, which is Into the Abyss in 2000. It's in hindsight, I think I didn't really care for it. It kind of got lost in the glut, kind of like what Penetralia and some of that stuff for you guys in the early 90s. This for us in the early 2000s, I think I had reviewed the self-titled Hypocrisy and Final Chapter, and so I kind of became the resident Hypocrisy guy or whatever. And Chris kind of tossed Into the Abyss at me, and I kind of was like, there was just other stuff coming out around this time that I just didn't care for.
More interesting stuff, probably.
But a tune, we did decide to pull one tune off of it, and it's a pretty neat tune. It's called Legions Descend, and it really is sort of an ode to the Osculum Penetralia kind of sound. It's kind of brings back a little bit more of the rawer production and some of the more fierce. It's less overproduced and some of that kind of stuff. And the only problem is, I think from this point on, Peter really doesn't know where to go with Hypocrisy for a while.
Yeah. Catch-22, buddy.
Yeah, Catch-22, and the Arrival and some of that stuff. It's kind of rooted in some of the melodic stuff. It's also there's a couple tunes where they're trying to experiment almost with crust punk or hardcore or something,
which doesn't really seem to fit at all with the stuff they've done before. And
the one thing, and Mark and I were talking about this from the last show and stuff, is that you can say about Hypocrisy is they're constantly evolving, which is cool, and you want that in a band, but there is sort of a evolving into places you don't really need to go.
See, they almost remind me not just the similarities with Megadeth with aliens and whatnot.
Yeah,
but they always seem they're kind of like the Megadeth of death metal.
Yeah, sure.
As far as their trajectory, the kind of
they go into a lot of good directions and a lot of bad directions.
And they're like a constant fixture always. And there's the personality kind of things with between Peter and
revolving
and those kind of things.
There's only one guy that's ever stuck it out with Hypocrisy besides Peter, and that's Michael Hedlund, the bass player.
Yeah, and that's kind of like Ulfson, who is now back in Megadeth again.
There you go. Interestingly enough. But so Hypocrisy a different kind of band, and they're really hard to pin down and define in a way, and that's I think why we felt that we needed to maybe devote a couple shows to sort of encapsulate the whole trajectory of their career. But fear not, Hypocrisy fans, because they go into a glut for a few years, and then 2005 rolls around, and kind of right off, it was definitely off of both Mark and I's radar screens.
I remember seeing it in the store, but I was kind of like, why would I give this a chance?
Yeah.
And it was actually reviewed pretty well. The research that I did on it as well. I think Terrorizer might have given it a pretty favorable review.
Yeah, and as they should. It's a great record. It's one of my favorite Hypocrisies, hands down. And even though it's got again another cheesy alien cover,
it's not a bad one.
Yeah, it kind of looks like the creature from the first X-Files movie that gets birthed and stuff, who had the claws and tore the crap out of all the people.
Oh yeah.
Kind of has that alien sort of feel to it. Anyways, it's a neat record, and the thing that I think rubbed off on Peter that gave him, I think, maybe not a new hope, that's probably the wrong way of putting it, but a new vision, I guess, is his work with Immortal.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the Immortal, not just the fact that Horg's drumming on the next two records,
sure,
but
yep.
I think you hear some riffing stuff that's very reminiscent of Immortal, the pace of everything, and letting it just kind of the drums are a lot more straightforward, I think, on these next couple records, and letting the kind of drums are just propulsion, and then we've got I think a totally different view on the riff.
Yeah, and I think, the one thing you can say about Final Chapter and Hypocrisy, the self-titled Hypocrisy record, is there's maybe a little, not too much going on, but there's a lot happening. There's everything's just sort of kind of layered over top each other, because I think
it's overproduced.
He's in an orgy of production at this point. And
it almost seems like the record's put together in the cutting room.
Yeah.
Not necessarily okay, here's the song, here's how it's going to be, take the take, whatever. It almost seems like, okay, we've got all these riffs and these 6 drum takes, let's put some songs together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing that you hear on an album like Virus, or even the new one, Taste of Extreme Divinity, is you hear, as you were talking about, a more straightforward, stripped down kind of approach, even not just with the drums, but even with some of the songwriting.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, you almost turn the dial back to Penetralia to some degree.
Sure, yeah. And
as far as the straightforwardness, the speed, a little bit more brutality, which we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, and that one of the bands that we keep coming back to as we listen, especially to Virus, is a band like Dimension Zero that never gets talked about. And Dimension Zero is very punchy, very in your face. They do have the melodic roots, but they're not kind of wussy like, say, you could argue that like Later Day in Flames kind of.
Yeah, I think they kind of took the torch from. I'm trying to think what era that would have been. Of In Flames. Well, I guess it would have been right before Jester Race.
Okay, yeah, just subterranean.
If Jester Race would have been a little bit more on the punchy, more extreme side, I think less melodic. That's kind of where Dimension Zero went.
Yeah, and Hypocrisy kind of picks up that kind of sound and then mixes it with like the Immortal sound or even the Eye kind of sound. Which was a Bath's kind of solo project he did with one of the guys from Enslaved and
Icedale.
Yeah. But. And you'll hear that in this next set as we sort of bounce into it. So, anyways, we're going to leave behind the self-titled record with Fractured Millennium and then get into Legions Ascend from Into the Abyss. And then our first of a trio of tunes from the Virus record with Let the Knife Do the Talking. Very cool tune.
Very Hypocrisy sounding title.
Exactly. Enjoy. Let the Knife Do the Talking, Legions Ascend, and Fractured Millennium. And I don't know if we made this clear, but on Virus, I know you mentioned the presence of Horg, but this is the first drumming from Horg that we've heard.
Yeah, Lars Skoke is gone. Yeah. He can eat his pizza all he wants now. He doesn't have to drum anymore.
And he could even probably shave the handlebar if he needs to.
Yeah, totally.
Kind of get back to family life or whatever. And at this point, too, where Peter has Abyss Studios, it's kind of funny to mention, this was in an article a few months back in Decibel, that he's kind of become is he the mayor of the town? And
no, he owns the town.
Owns the whole town, really?
Yeah.
And there's like 100 people there or something like that?
Oh, not even that. There's I think there was 30 people or something. I mean, he took over, there's a old asylum that was there. That I think he uses part of that as Abyss.
Okay.
And then he bought a bunch, and then started buying, slowly buying the houses up. So, I mean, the whole thing's kind of like Abyss Studio, his home, and then areas where people can stay while they're recording in Abyss.
So he's like one of those old industrial revolution guys who bought a town for his factory workers to live in and then dictated what they could and couldn't do.
Yeah, basically, it seems like so.
I think he's a lot nicer than some of those guys, but
I'd hope so.
Yeah, but so Peter's he's enjoying quite a weird, he's got an odd life. I bet when he flew over to America and tried to be in all those Florida death metal bands in the late 80s, early 90s, like Love and Creation. I doubt he ever saw his career path being that he owned one of the most successful heavy metal studios of all time, and owning a town, and being part of several bands. I mean, besides Pain and the Abyss, Peter's done stuff with like Bloodbath and also what's the Post Terrorizer, the Lockup band.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the second Lockup record.
So, I mean, Peter's he's had his hand in a lot of cookie jars, much like Dan Swano, of Sanity, with Unisound and all that stuff. So.
Oh, yeah, Tackern's had much more success financially.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Swano, I think he kind of got out of the game just as the game was kind of getting going, Oh, yeah. I mean, he produced some of the most influential, death metal records, but yet it was at a time when there wasn't any money in it. Yeah. And then, you start pumping in the Dimmu Borgers and all that kind of stuff. And that's Immortal and that sort of stuff. And that stuff does well financially. So, but, we'll turn attention back to the Virus record for a pair of tunes. And again, you're hearing more of the Immortal stuff, and the tune we're going to hear next, which is Warpath, which I do believe kind of kicks the whole record off. It's got a very incredible, very propulsive Sons of Northern Darkness kind of feel to it. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it just kind of goes right for the jugular. And really, again, they're sort of hitting a new kind of stride. And with this record and Taste of Extreme Divinity, I think they've kind of created a nice, consistent sound that doesn't have to evolve so quickly that it loses people. I think that's the one thing I feel.
Well, they found a formula, I think, that works, and they've done it pretty well and pretty interesting on these last two records.
Yeah, and I'm kind of curious. I hope they can kind of keep it together for whatever they do next, and we're kind of curious to see what they do live, what kind of set list they'll put together, because I mean, if you kind of just recently listened to part one, you can tell. I mean, this is a band that's traveled a long way, in a lot of different directions, and
hopefully working, keep in time. I've heard bad things about him live.
Supposedly, he was pretty awful when Immortal played out in the New England Metal Fest or whatever. I remember Brian, one of our old compatriots, said he saw.
Oh yeah, that was
there. It was like 2001, 2000.
It might have been 2000. That was before Immortal really had much touring under their belt either. I've heard they're a pretty good outfit now.
Okay. Yeah, I hope so. I'd like to see them.
Yeah.
I wish I've never seen them. I wish they'd tour here. Dang it.
They could totally get enough people. Man. I mean, hipster kids and whatever else,
But anyways, you hear that with Warpath and then Craving for Another Killing, which is the last of the tunes that we'll play from the Virus record. And this has a cool sample from, where was it from?
The Iceman. It was a documentary on, I don't know if that was the name of it or not, but that was the guy's name. He was a hitman for the mob in the 90s, and kind of did this, I think when he was in prison, maybe right before he was going to be killed on death row, did a documentary, kind of like a tell-all of all the awful things this guy did. So.
Yeah, so it's got a creepy little intro where he's kind of talking, and again, another classic kind of Hypocrisy kind of title, Craving for Another Killing, kind of like Let the Knife Do the Talking and such. And then we're going to end with our first of a pair of tunes from the Taste of Extreme Divinity record. So enjoy Warpath and Craving for Another Killing, and hang 'em high.
Sounds so exotic. I was just a murderer.
Sentence, locked up in your hell. Your crime will now be tested by the jury representing death. In the nation Somebody look at me wrong, I would kill him. Stab him, shoot him. But the last thing they ever saw was me. And if they carry that glimpse to eternity, infinity, or whatever it is they're going to be thinking of me, I'd watch them die. For the crimes you've done, blows on your hands will wash away. Remorse for the crimes you've done.
Hang 'em High, Craving for Another Killing, and Warpath. Was Hang 'em High a Clint Eastwood?
It was
Western.
Clint Eastwood Western, yeah. It was a good one.
There you go. And what you heard there was the first of a pair of songs we're going to kind of end things with from Taste of Extreme Divinity, which was put out in 2009, in case you didn't hear us talking about it in part one, and features a really cool cover from
Christian Wallen, Necrolord himself.
One of our good buddies, Necrolord, from Grotesque and Liars in Wait.
What if he still gets mail?
Diabolique.
Dressed Necrolord.
Yeah, well, the guy...
Great Deceiver, too.
Ekarath from the Swedish death metal book says he still calls him Necrolord, and he still calls Tampa Ghost Slaughter. Wait, is it... What is it? Is it Ghost Slaughter? It might be.
Ghost Slaughter was one of the guys, I thought.
I can't remember.
Yeah, whatever.
It's been so long since I've thought about calling Grotesque.
Hey, Ghost Slaughter, what's up, dude?
What's going on? And we've met Tampa, a couple times, so... We went to Wendy's with Martin from At the Gates at one time in Grand Rapids, I remember. So probably got a bacon double cheeseburger or something like that. Yeah. But the tune we're going to end with is No Tomorrow, and what you just heard there on Hang 'em High kind of is they're taking like some of the melodic kind of Dimension Zero sound that you heard on Virus, and I'm starting to hear some like seance and some different kind of influences come in. And
it sounds like a Black Mark record from like 1992.
Yeah,
it's really weird.
And that's kind of a cool sound. It's a pretty obscure thing to go to. And Seance is another band, like, talking about where do you put certain early 90s Swedish death metal bands like Hypocrisy and Edge of Sanity and Cemetery.
Seance was more... they were kind of like more bizarre as far as their songwriting. Like, they're kind of Black Death. They're kind of straight ahead, like American sounding death metal.
Yeah.
But then, Salt Rubbed Eyes comes on. Like, what the hell? It was like weird industrial elements in it. And that's another band I'd like to maybe do a show
for
on.
Sure. And they've kind of made a cool comeback. Their brand new record was pretty awesome. So, but we're gonna end things with No Tomorrow, and it's a cool one. It's again going back to that immortal influence that we said has kind of seeped its way into Hypocrisy, but it's a little sleazier, got a little cock rock kind of feel to it. And it'd be neat to hear Immortal kind of do some more of this kind of stuff.
I'd like to see another I record.
Yeah,
really.
So would I. That was a great record. So that's one we could probably devote a show to down the road if we had to. But anyways, we hope you've enjoyed a hefty dose of Hypocrisy the last few, these two-part shows. Jeez, I can't talk right now. I think I got food on my mind. But, let us know what you thought. Let us know if there's a specific era you liked. I know we skipped The Arrival and Catch-22, and, we're going to have to apologize ahead of time and say those are just records we don't get into.
Or if maybe you think there's a certain Pain record that's worth reinvestigating,
Yeah.
Let us know at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Leave us comments on requiempodcast.com.
Yeah. Our iTunes, you can leave comments and download old episodes and such.
There's lots and lots. What is there, 80 some?
Yeah, we're up. We'll be up in about 86, 87 here.
Yeah.
So we're getting close to that top 10 countdown of the 10 greatest years in metal history, which... I
know how much everybody likes countdowns, so wait till you hear ours.
Love countdowns. So it'll be our first. So for Hypocrisy Part 2 and No Tomorrow, I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.